Okay, so we are taking two last big chunks to finish off. We're going to do chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13. That's a lot. So when I say it's a lot, that's a lot of pages. It's a lot of chapters. However, uh, the plot has now been fully revealed. There may be some things that we don't quite understand what he means about what's going to happen, but within these chapters, we have seen almost everything going behind the scenes laid out for us. How it's going to resolve, the specifics of its resolution is to be determined from the last few chapters we'll read next time. But this is the thrust of the book. We started off with kind of almost slice of life to young married academics and the sort of pettiness that happens in a faculty room and some of the sort of silly ways that small college towns can operate. And we have now moved fully, directly, and completely to long-awaited prophecies, a cosmic battle, and the humanity's fight between good and evil to be settled here and now. Um, so as we jump back into things, we ended kind of on a cliffhanger last time in chapter 9 with Mark's arrest. He had done all that he could to escape, and as he was that chapter 9 or does the arrest come in chapter 10? Okay,
The rest comes in 10.
okay. So at 9, but he was being sent out to, you're here forever. Go get your wife. And in chapter 10 now, as we're still dealing with the aftermath of the riot, with the aftermath of James' assault. They are now putting this would be Wither and Hardcastle are putting really all of their pressure on Mark. And this new bit of information is that they have found his missing wallet at the crime scene of Bill the Blizzard's murder. So when Hengist was killed, this would be a few days before, they now have him absolutely over a barrel. And Mark is seeing everything. He's felt like all of his power and abilities have been stripped away before, but now with this sense of where else can he possibly turn? So they've set him up, and that's very obvious, and even he understands that. He probably guesses that they're the ones who have murdered Hengist, but it sort of doesn't matter at this point. His head is reeling, his head is spinning, and they are very clearly using this as leverage. Oh, we're going to take care of you. Oh, it's a good thing we found it and not the regular police. Oh, you can rely on us and you can count on us. But whether it is some vestige of right and wrong still within Mark to say he knows that he's innocent and he wants to fight this, or just the blinders being fully and completely removed. Not just that these guys are manipulative, not just that he doesn't like them, but just how depraved all of this is. Everything has been false, everything has been fake, everything has been a subterfuge, and everything has been just raw manipulation and power. So in his somewhere a combination between panic and furor, he decides to make a break for it. And in making a break for it, there on the grounds, in the dark, who does he meet? But Wither. How can Wither possibly be out here? I just left him back in the room. And something primal snaps in Mark, and Mark, who has probably never thrown a punch in his life, suddenly can't do anything other than try to strike Wither down so that he can run and still be with Jane, where he finds that it wasn't really Wither, but more of an apparition. And if that was confusing to you, or if it seemed kind of unexpected or unusual, the very brief explanation given to the end, where almost like we might think, why would a ghost haunt a house? Maybe there was something important to that house to the person as they were living, or maybe there was some sense of unfinished business. And Lewis is basically saying, what if instead you have so given yourself up and over to something outside of yourself that little vestiges of who you used to be still somehow linger and echo? What we should gather between these chapters, without being explicit at this point, Hardcastle is not on the inside. She's just a malevolent monster that they find useful, just like they find Mark useful for certain things. Even the head is not the head. Even that was a trick. And the people who minister to the head, they are doing so not realizing they're just going through motions that aren't really accomplishing anything. Wither is on the inside, and Frost is on the inside. And there's this really weird, almost disturbing moment in one of the later chapters, I think it's either 11 or 12, where the two of them are face to face speaking, and they seem to close in on one another as though they were about to kiss. They're so close. This is the fellowship of the damned. These vessels, we have to question how much humanity remains in them. But their bodies, for the most part, now belong to something or someone else. And that something or someone else uses them not completely unlike puppets. There's still some vestige of personality within them, but whether it was out of a desire of power or knowledge or influence or awe, they have individually given themselves over to these spiritual forces, these malevolent spiritual forces. And what's left of them physically is, that's why Wither always seems to be looking past people. That's why he's always humming some dreary tune that doesn't go anywhere. That's why he speaks in these vague inanities where it takes him a paragraph to say something and it still doesn't really mean anything. These are more human-like creatures than they are human anymore. And if we had any sense of that before, it's really sort of laid out over the space of these chapters. The nice, for all of its trappings of technological progress, and even Philostrato talking about the destruction of the organic so that there could be a singular mind left, no one else really seems to understand that this is a plot of the devil. And that all of these people involved in a variety of things, all of their sucking up for favor or doing little jobs that they think will get them acknowledgement or importance or into the inner circle, everything ultimately is all nonsense and almost meaningless, because what's really trying to happen is to, how can the world and all of humanity be given over to evil? A spiritual force, and they would recognize the spiritual force. This is, I believe, Frost, who in his final talk with Mark has, this is their opportunity where they think, well, now that he's fully and completely broken, we have one more chance for him to be useful, and that's to draw him all the way in. And that's where he starts talking about the macrobe. So that's a C.S. Lewis sort of invention about, but as he lays it out, that's the interesting thing. We understand the concept of a microbe, that there are microscopic beings, creatures, entities that we can't see that have always been all around us. But it took a certain technological advancement on humanity's part to discover them. They were always there. We always had germs on our hands, but we didn't realize until just over 100 or so years ago that those germs were there, what they were doing, what they were like. Um, there's there's super interesting stories about a lot of this is in Victorian England, where germ theory, um, a lot of things we totally take for granted are being kind of formalized and discovered. There's a real interesting story about, I think his name is John Snow, who this was in the 1800s in England. Uh, and I believe there was like a typhus outbreak. We did a typhus or cholera. And people were dying left and right, and lots of people were getting sick. And so there was a sense of we know something's causing it, but we don't know what. So there were theories about these unseen forces and stuff, but medicine was not what we consider modern medicine. And it's this one guy who basically lays out a chart of the city and starts marking plots about where these cases come from. And he is able to use data in a way that on a public health scale, no one had ever done before. And it zeroed in on a particular well within the city. There was a water well that people were drawing from. And when they excavated it, I think it was like a dead sheep. And once they removed that, the cholera outbreak was over. And no one had ever been able to do that before. Now, contaminated wells had been happening since the dawn of time. People had been getting sick from stuff and passing it along through contaminated water or ways that they contaminated each other after they had that contaminated water for forever. But it took, the invention of microscopes to look in water and find things that shouldn't be there. It took laying out on zoning maps and data analysis and all these things before. And we expect as technology continues, one day, we assume that modern medicine will discover more things about us that we didn't realize or ways to treat things we already knew about. And Lewis's explanation about at the heart of nice is the discovery that wither and frost in particular are in the true inside of, in the same way that there's these microscopic creatures that have always been there, but it took something for us to discover them. There are macro, meaning larger, greater than, or above, macroscopic creatures above us. What he is describing in his kind of technical jargon is the spiritual world. And he says basically that there has the reason that all of this is coming to a head is that we have now found a way to make contact. Our technology has had a microscope invention level change where we have now been able to make contact with these macroscopic beings. And in doing so, these macroscopic beings are now influencing and directing them as they have been influencing and directing the course of human history. Now it's going to happen in a very direct way. What has been more subtle, what has been more indirect, what has been the connections have been very sparse. They refer to, there have been, unique individuals over history that have had some ability. But now it's almost like we've found the secret portal to open up and to allow the macroscopic beings to flood into this world and finally do directly what they have only been able to accomplish indirectly. And they're super excited about this. And the whole goal is to show Mark that now that you know the truth, you can be a part of this. We might refer to this as demonic possession. They have science fiction sounding technological names for it. They would say these beings, as much as they are above us, not just the geographical orientation of above, but just beyond us, they are similarly beyond our ridiculous emotional concepts of good and evil. Well, of course, that's what the bad guy says. Um, there is something though that happens in Mark when faced with the true starkness of his circumstances. And it does the last effect that Wither and Frost and maybe even the Macrobes, the malevolent spiritual forces, expect. As Mark runs off to try to find Jane, he can't find her, but who does he find? Dimble. He'd had some kind of contact with Dimble before. He sort of vaguely knows him. Dimble has never liked Mark. And we probably have those people that we just like, they just rub us the wrong way. They push our buttons, or we just don't particularly trust. And as much as the Dimbles really liked Jane, they probably always sort of disapproved with her choice of Mark. But then when somebody makes that choice, it feels very petty to keep saying it. You just have to sort of swallow it. If anyone has any reasons why these two should not be lawfully wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. They are in the forever hold your peace part.
Yeah.
But now, when it comes to it, they speak very frankly with each other. At least Dimble does. Mark still has his old habits of trying to curry favor with people, his old habits of trying to be sort of manipulative with people, it's almost a childlike or a childish sort of, you make it look like your feelings have been hurt and you just sort of wait for the person. Oh, no, I didn't mean that. And now, it's very manipulative. But even that begins to fall away. So the closer Mark gets to his feelings of true despair, the more his pretense begins to fall off him. And now he just sort of seems to Dimble like a desperate man. And Dimble almost gets a sense of hope. He definitely, for maybe the first time since he's met Mark, feels a sense of pity. Legitimate, the pity of genuine charity. And it's the fact that he's just like this good old guy. He almost feels bad and wants to just tell Mark everything. But he has enough good sense about him not to. But he's willing to take Mark in. Now, Mark at the end gets to the doorway, puts his hand on the handle. And then there's, again, kind of like Jane. Jane took 2 chapters, like, I don't want to be drawn into anything. And there's Mark, same way. We might use the biblical illusion of putting your hand back on the plow and not being worthy of the kingdom of heaven. This is the person who, when they get the call, this is the young man who Jesus says, follow me. And he says, well, let me go bury my father first. And then, to follow Christ is a bold and potentially frightening adventure. And when we try to manage it or mitigate it, we are not putting him on the throne of our hearts. We're trying to stay there ourselves. We're trying to be in control. We're trying to set the standard. We're trying to make sure this happens in ways that are sensible to us, that are okay with us. And that is what Mark does. And because he hesitates, if he had gone with Dimble, the odds are he would have made it back to St. Anne's. But he wants an hour. He wants an hour to think. He wants some time to make sure. And what happens? He's arrested. So that brings us to that next step, where in the arrest, in his fear, in his understanding, even once he realizes, I am back at Belbury, I'm back with the nice, they're going to kill me. He's been arrested for Bill Hingett's murder with even the circumstantial evidence, with the way things are being run now. He's seen these people are evil. These people will stoop to no end. They already have evidence. It doesn't matter if they're the ones who kill me. It doesn't matter if they turn me over to the regular police. They will influence it. I have no way out. But the crazy thing about his despair is, again, it has led them to a place that Wither, Frost, and maybe even the Macrobes don't expect. And that is the fear of impending death has opened up in Mark something he may have probably never been able to open up on his own. Like a lock that has kept his heart sealed. The fear of the practical fear, the visceral fear. This is not an abstraction. He's thinking about his body. He's looking at his hands, and he's thinking about the hands of a corpse. He's imagining this is not something that might happen to anyone one day. This is within days. I might be dead. This has actually driven him closer to God than he has maybe ever been before in his life. And it is absolutely cemented in him that the nice are his enemies and the enemies of humanity. Never again will he believe anything they say. And that's a hard thing for him to say because he still struggles with it. As soon as Frost starts talking about bringing him into an inner circle, those old temptations start bubbling up again. Mark has been lost, if not a hopeless case, for this entire book and maybe even his whole life. He is someone who has not loved and enjoyed things for themselves. He has loved and enjoyed things because he thought he could get something out of it. He thought, this is the sort of person who would wear, they would pick clothes based off of what the cool kids were wearing, not what he wanted to wear. He would pick a subject based off of what the influential teacher might notice him for doing, not what he wanted to study. He would change his habits, change his life, change his activities in order to be popular, to be interesting to other people, to do things that he thought other people would gravitate towards or appreciate. It's like he's been waiting to live his life, and he never has until this moment. And even in the desperation of impending death, it's almost like he's coming to life for the first time. He's been a hopeless, sad sack this entire time. And I'm telling you right now, this man is on the edge of real life. The only question is, will he ever get the chance? We remember St. Valentine's Day every February 14th without knowing too much about the historical traditional renderings of who St. Valentine was. And it kind of comes and goes, and a bunch of them are in, there's various legends and stories and so on and so forth. But several of the traditional stories have to do with St. Valentine's, like the legendary St. George as being in Roman times a pagan official. St. George is a soldier and St. Valentine as an official who, in the moment of decision, see right and wrong with clarity and stand against the evil of what the Roman Empire wanted to accomplish in that moment. For St. Valentine, a lot of the stories have to do with the either the rape and or murder of virgins, and saying, no, I refuse. And they're killed. They're murdered. The saving faith in Christ seems to come almost out of nowhere, and it doesn't last very long because their lives are cut short. By standing for the gospel, they're immediately killed. So this is not the sort of saint who lived like this, decades of a holiness of life and all this kind of stuff. This is someone in a moment of decision, even at the end, said yes when their entire life up to that point had been no. could Mark be one of these guys? And the question is if he'll live long enough. And maybe even if he does live long enough, his stand of faith will be brief because his life will be brief. So this is where we are on the Mark side of the story. When I talk about the pace picking up, I mean, I feel like we're running. Every page feels almost out of breath. The Mark story and the Jane story rush with such speed now. But from the Mark end of the story, this is about as much as we're going to take. He is finally, he's not only felt this deepened desire, this longing for Jane, but the longing for goodness that Jane represents to him, as do people like the Dimbles, as do people like the Denistons, as does this friend we've never heard about before, but we get this sort of quick backstory that he did have one true friend growing up. And what did he do? He sold him out to go hang out with the popular kids. All of these regrets of his life, all of these opportunities where he could have done something meaningful, worthwhile, or just real, not faking it because he thought it would make him more popular, but something actually real. And in this moment where he's fearing death, what he's reaching for is reality. And that reality will be found and is only found in the person of God. So there is this is one of the sermons that I read at the Great Easter Vigil. It's the only service of the year where I read someone else's words for the sermon. And I think this is the John Chrysostom Easter Vigil sermon. So he was a famous orator and saint of the early church. And the words are beautiful, the words are very strong, but he starts talking about the work of Good Friday and Easter on hell itself, that hell becomes embittered because of the resurrection. Hell grabs human life in Jesus on the cross and thinks it's one, and it tries to swallow it. But what it swallowed was God, and it has destroyed it. Hell is embittered because it has been defeated. It's embittered because it has been conquered. Because it's been destroyed. Good Friday, from the point of view of hell, looks like ultimate victory. But instead, it is its destruction. In grabbing with malevolent intent, trying to make an ultimate power play, hell actually destroys itself on Good Friday. The ultimate power play against Mark about the threat of his death, and the ultimate power play of Merlin. And Nice has actually opened up its own avenue for defeat. If they had not done this, they probably would have been able to do anything they wanted to do. In their greed, in their avarice, in their malevolence, in their wickedness, they sought to take a shortcut with Merlin. But even on Mark, we're going to push him into a corner just because we can. And where did it actually push him other than closer to God? Now, on the Jane side of things, with all of her visions, and obviously that's why Nice wants her. They think in her visions, there is something useful, something controllable, and they are desperate for Merlin because they think that in Merlin, they have found a conduit that will allow the immediate and powerful entry into our world and into humanity. So instead of like a little bit at a time or a person at a time, there is something about Merlin with his magical power that's going to operate like a portal. and all of their spiritual malevolence can pour out at once. It's like ripping a hole in opening up the gates of hell. And it should be able to pour out and just take control. That's their goal with Merlin, because obviously, if he's a magician, he's a wizard. That's bad. That's evil. He's a bad guy. He's on our side, and they have been completely wrong from everybody's been wrong. Everybody's been wrong about Merlin. And as they go to look for him, they can't find him. And where does he show? He actually shows up at St. Anne's. This is that deep connection that Merlin must have, even though he doesn't understand it, to God's natural created order. He is somehow pulled into the presence of ransom. And so we see a little bit of the magic of Merlin, where McPhee is just put to sleep. Zoop, go away, boy. But then we have this showdown, in essence, where we don't know Merlin's intent. And it takes the back and forth between him and Ransom for it to come clear that Merlin was always on the side of God. It's just, he lived in a funny time, a different time than us. I really enjoyed the distinctions about kind of looking at how he operated, how he acted, the words he used, his actions, everything from the way that he would, he treated them like slaves and stable boys first. And it wasn't malicious on his part, but it comes across kind of mean-spirited. Even with Jane, Jane, give me leave and I'll kill her for you. I'll execute her for you. And Dimble seems to think that he's bloodthirsty, but in his own way, it gets, Merlin was actually enormously charitable and gentle. It's just, if we were to literally transport someone from 1,500 years ago today, humanity is humanity. Like, we're all, inside, there's so much commonality, but the culture is so radically different. We would have a really hard time understanding one another, even if we could translate words back and forth. It would take a while to explain just the way that we approach life. Merlin, who was giving his savings away to the widows and the poor, Merlin, who, though he was often accused of being satanic or devilish or coming, he was the product of a demon and a woman, and all those have been kind of woven into the Arthurian legends at some point. I like the little thing about his order even forbade him from using a bladed instrument with gardening. There's a I have not worn my kilt in many years, but I have a couple, and one of them, the one that I would most, I used to wear to like a diocesan convention, but the tartan pattern is called Clark, and it's blues and blacks. It's kind of nice, but it's very muted, especially when you consider like a lot of the other popular tartans are there's reds and there's oranges and greens and stuff. And this feels very muted. Well, Clark, in that English and Scottish way of meaning clergy, it is the clergy tartan, and because it was the tartan to be worn by clergy, it has to be dull, muted colors. We weren't supposed to wear flashy, bright colors. And you sort of took that on as a discipline, just like wearing black or wearing the collar. Even your tartan should be, kind of muted and dull. It shouldn't be showy or ostentatious. And so, even Merlin is more, he's closer to a monk or a priest than he is a Harry Potter wizard or a Dungeons and Dragons wizard. He does seem to have some legitimate power in him, but it's a power of being in touch with creation in a way that has really fallen by the wayside. He even offers to Ransom, I can fix your foot. I need to wander to and fro. I need to remake my old acquaintances and speak with the trees and the water and the stones. the power will come back. Everything that you see, you think it's different, but in its bones, the earth is, it's still the earth that I knew. There's a very fundamental, his magic, however we're calling it, seems to do with the powers of creation. And as Ransom said, we're not allowed to do that anymore. And even back in the day, kind of pushing your luck now, weren't you? So in Merlin, we have found someone who has both been faithful and unfaithful. He has both sought to honor God, but also kind of played with fire. He has opened himself up to the spiritual realm in a way where it was maybe closer and more present, 1,500 years ago, 2,000, 10,000 years ago. Maybe in these more primitive societies before we were so cloaked in technology and in the comfort of what we had created, that you were a little closer to the land and a little closer to the spirit world. Um, we still get stories today about people. Oh, I was a Wall Street broker and I kind of had enough, and so I went upstate, and now I just own a farm, and all I do is work the land. And we kind of understand at some level what that person is trying to explain to us. That in the simplicity of tilling the soil, of growing the food that you eat, that there is something you can't even describe. You definitely can't put a dollar figure on it, but there's something seems to be very fundamental about that. Not just in a wholesome sense, but like something connected to a reality that seems more concrete than the zeros and the ones of online banking. If you have been deep in the woods on a quiet night where the light pollution is gone and there's no noises from the outside, and you hear the sound of nature, and you look up and you see more stars than you realize were up there all along, there is something about that that is so ethereal and transcendent. What if we always lived like that? There weren't lights on all the time. There weren't cars going and motors and engines and you know, we would there would be a lot of things we would miss, but that kind of raw reliance on nature directly, and therefore reliance on God with a lot of clarity, is a different perspective. And that's where the magic of Merlin, I think, is coming from. This connectedness to where spirit and creation still sort of met. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the spirit moved over the waters and all this kind of stuff. So spirit and material were super close. And over time, it seems that they've more drifted or been purposely separated. And he stands at a point where it was still kind of sort of there, but only a select few could maybe make that connection, but it's only gotten further and further away. And so they have met in Merlin, an ally that they never expected. They assumed he would be an adversary. He's not only going to be an ally, he will be, and Nice is the one who started all this. If they hadn't have started this process, maybe Merlin stays underground in his sleep the entire time. But because they've started this, that's the plan. Merlin will be the conduit that Nice thought, just not in the way Nice thought. He will not be a conduit to open up the gates of hell. Merlin will become the conduit to bring down the forces of heaven. These spiritual forces, like Malacandra, Mars, and Paralandra, Venus, will come down to earth for the first time. They have been forbidden. This is, the course of human life God has said, you have to stay out of it. These intelligences, these archangels, you can't fight their battles for them, but they can respond. And that's what Nice has done. They're the ones who knocked down that wall. They thought they were doing it to allow the evil spiritual force to take over, but by knocking down the wall, that has allowed the army of heaven to enter. But there's got to be somebody to stand in that gap. Someone, it's almost like someone has to hold the door open and allow those forces to come through. And maybe that person won't survive because it's too much for humanity to take in. And Merlin, this is why he has been preserved. Well, this is why he's been asleep for 1,500 years, to fulfill this purpose. He's a little bit clean and a little bit dirty. And because of that, because he has made contact with the spiritual world, he is able to receive this in a way that probably no one else other than Ransom in that group could have done. But Merlin has been chosen by God for reasons we can only guess at, but part of it seems to be this is maybe a little bit of his penance. Maybe you dabbled a little too deeply. And even if it was generally well-intentioned, you really did do some stuff that you shouldn't have done. Now, in this sacrifice, all will be made right. And what you had gone a little too far on has now given you the unique ability to receive this power one more time, but for truly the forces of good and to fulfill God's good plan. Instead of absorbing spiritual forces for knowledge or for wisdom or for skill, that was always a little on the shady side. It was always a little on the self-centered side. It was always a little on the playing with fire kind of side. But now Merlin has this capacity to do it, and it's going to be used one last time, but it's going to be used to fulfill God's plan for his armies, not just to fight our battles for us, but to respond. Because Nice has done the exact thing that they never expected themselves to do. Again, this is hell reaching out and grabbing the body of Christ and cackling, ah, ha, 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 we've got you now, without realizing what they've actually done. There was gosh, I don't even remember the name of the movie. I remember it being on cable a bunch when I was a kid. And I only remember a scene from it. It's so weird. But it was like, I want to say it must have been in the 1800s or something. Maybe it's like a shipwreck movie or something. But I remember there being kind of a Polynesian culture. And they were trapped on an island. And I guess maybe it was somebody else. But anyway, they were trapped because there were tiger sharks that surrounded the island on this reef. But they had figured out how they could protect themselves from the tiger sharks. They took breadfruit and they made a fire in the boat, and they brought it out and boiled water and put the breadfruit in it until the breadfruit was piping hot. And they threw it out, and the tiger sharks, who will kind of eat almost anything, they ate the breadfruit. I mean, they wanted the people, but they would eat the breadfruit and they would just swallow it. But the fact that it was boiling hot would actually kill the tiger shark. Tiger shark thought it got an easy meal. But by going it explodes their stomach. And it was the only thing it basically saved the lives of these people who were trying to escape this shipwreck in this island. This is what Nice has done. And it is likened to Good Friday. Hell consumes the body of Christ. Ha 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 ha, we've won. But in doing so and swallowing that, they have swallowed their own destructions. Nice thinks they are allowing hell to conquer, but they are pulling heaven down on their own heads. And they will be destroyed, really through their own hubris, which is a very, very old story. This is the action that McPhee has been waiting for. It's just not coming through them. It's not coming through raising an army. It's not coming through them appealing to Parliament. The Nice has created a situation where almost like a spiritual nexus has formed. And now that Merlin is here, Merlin will stand in that gap like only he can. What's going to happen is heaven will unload. And what the rest of the people of St. Anne's will have to do with this, we don't even know yet. But this is the point where if the battle has begun, the final showdown has now been laid out. And we're going to approach it to see what actually happens. We get all sorts of little things, little bits and pieces tossed out. I really enjoy Merlin's conversations with Ransom. And we get this, little things like, he eats food differently. He has no idea what a fork is. A fork is a relatively recent innovation as far as humanity is concerned. And he eats very daintily and gently. And they see he's kind of like a gentleman, but in his own way that we would assume is very crude. It's just actually really, really different than us. It's not entirely unlike seeing somebody who is super adept at chopsticks. They don't use a knife and a fork, and yet it's just as efficient. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I can use chopsticks, but I'm slow and awkward. But this completely different way of approaching the world, if that is your life, your comfort and your ability and everything else, why does Merlin want to kill Jane? Did you catch that? He wants to kill Jane, not because he's angry with her, but because her grievous sin. And it is a deserved consequence. For millennia, apparently, bloodlines have been gathered to be fulfilled through Mark and Jane. And because Mark and Jane were young academics who wanted to put off children until later or maybe never, they've already been married for a couple of years. The child should have been born already. If that child had been born, that child would have been a part of this and apparently would have turned the tide for 1,000 years. But in their own just kind of self-centered, it wasn't even super deliberate probably. But they have spoiled something that could have been powerful and profound just out of I want my career to advance. I had told you before that Lewis would sometimes describe himself as the last pre-modern man. Lewis's explanation then would absolutely apply this as a way to approach things that we completely take for granted. The purpose of marriage, the consequence of something like birth control, things that we kind of feel like we just sort of, we do what we do. And this is, what are the moral implications? Well, this is the sense of birth control, not that it's, causing sin, but by you impeding the godly process of your bodies, you are potentially missing out on things that ought to happen. Children who should have been born, blessings that should have occurred. For all of the children who have never been born for a variety of reasons, was the cure for cancer in one of them? Was one of them going to grow up and change the world? Was one of them going to make an amazing technological innovation? Was one of them going to be, on and on and on? And so Merlin, in his very, very earthy, very matter of fact, like this is, and Jane just she didn't even understand. This was probably never even a deliberate choice. And we're like, no, I will refuse the bloodline and thwart the will. No, I mean, for her, it was probably made sense. Yeah, let's wait for a while, and I want to work on my career, and we're still young, and we need to figure each other out, and all these things. But again, it's a presumption of us being only accountable to us. When freedom and liberty means I do what I want to do, not I'm free to finally do what I ought to do. What do we miss? And these are questions we just don't really ask anymore. These are questions that modernity said are either no longer relevant or they've already been resolved. And, in some ways, Merlin is speaking the words of Lewis himself. That pre-modern perspective of pulling yourself out of yourself. We are always a part of something greater. And we also get that fun little interaction where where Merlin is like, okay, all right, I get it. Plan. We'll call me being destroyed by absorbing the spiritual forces plan A. But I'm the counselor to the Pendragon of Logres, and that's you. So let's spitball plan B. How about we go to the king? And Ransom is like, yeah, you don't understand. Okay. If your king won't help, let's go to the next king over. And he's like, and he starts naming these kingdoms. And these are like places you can either look up in history or in the Arthurian legend. And they're just kind of fun little, almost like little Easter eggs. And Ransom has to explain, no, this perspective of being cut off from the spiritual life of God being vibrant and vital and just relying on technology and what we can accomplish through our minds and hands, it's everywhere. And he starts like throwing out like, anything you could possibly think of. And he finally gets, well, maybe it's time to call in the emperor, the emperor of Rome. And Rand's like, oh, gee, poor guy. Like, no, the church isn't even undivided anymore. The church, whether the great schism where East and West split, the Protestant Reformation, even after the Protestant Reformation, where churches squabble and split even further. And poor Merlin is like, what the heck? I take a 1,500-year-old nap and you guys have ruined everything. He kind of feels it at this point. And he's even saying, okay, perhaps there is an opportunity when worst comes to worst, you break glass in case of emergency. We should go to the pagan kingdoms. And he starts naming them. And these are like ancient words for different places in history. India and China. And even then, Ransom's like, it's not just the West. This self-centered perspective, this cutting off from spiritual life and either keeping it in a modest perspective or assuming it doesn't exist at all, it's everywhere. There are no options left. And then with that, Merlin says, okay. His phrase is actually something along the lines of, when the earth is closed, the fox turns on the hounds. So basically, when every avenue of escape has been thoroughly closed off, what do you do other than turn and fight? So he's ready. So this is where we are. As I said, the plot to be revealed has now been revealed. Anything else that comes from this point out is just the details of what that means and how it's going to go. Oh, and of course, Mr. Bultitude is one of the 7 great bears of Logres who will do something, who will do the greatest thing a bear has done since some other bear that nobody's ever heard of before. It's a fun line. But it says that even Mr. Bultitude might have a little part to play at some point. So again, the magic of Merlin is not like abracadabra, wave a magic wand kind of stuff. This seems to be very, very earthy. There's even an illusion that, Merlin is saying, I need to wander to and fro and reacquaint myself with the rocks and stuff. Like, let me take on nice by doing that. And Ransom's like, you can cause a flood or a rock slide, but they're just gonna fix it and keep coming. So it seems like there's something in creation itself that Merlin can kind of tap into. And again, I'm gonna suggest it's because in an older time, the spiritual world and the natural world were a lot closer. And Merlin was one of those folks who could kind of stand there, maybe one of the last. And maybe even he shouldn't have done it. But this will be his work as their ally, not to zap the bad guys, but to be really kind of he himself will be the portal. I'm going to say something else. Of course, everyone else is this time they're just trying to absorb all this and take it all in. But the specifics of how this is going to work out, and we'll get in our last 4 chapters that we'll do next time, and we'll finish the book. But here is everything that has been kind of hinted at or promised. This is kind of an ultimate battle for the fate of humanity. And all the forces of evil have been marshaled together, assuming that their sneak attack, their Pearl Harbor, is going to end the war. But what they've done by doing that, not unlike Pearl Harbor, they've poked the bear, which has now engendered a response. Now, if you're not familiar with a little bit of the backstory of Pearl Harbor, understand that Imperial Japan had pulled the same trick on Russia, 30-something years before. In the Russo-Japanese War, they attacked Port Arthur, which is up, on the eastern end of the Russian Empire. And they strike such a blow that it takes in the Russian Empire, which seemed like it'd be so much bigger and so much more powerful. But they were also a little bit backwards, and they were also not as modern as they thought they were. But the Japanese, who had modernized very, very rapidly, took a calculated risk. If we hit your port where you had all of your Pacific Navy, we can knock you right out of the game from the get-go. And basically, the Russians never recovered. And the Japanese beat them.
Wow.
Now, it wasn't like we're conquering Russia, but eventually the Tsar had to truce. So, that happens like in the early 1900s. That was Japan's calculated risk. We are going to hit them so hard. Number one, we're going to knock out the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. And number two, we think the Americans are weak. We think that they're kind of spineless. And if we hit them hard enough, they will cower backwards and never start. Remember, we were not actively involved in World War II at that point. We were giving material aid to the Allies. We were enforcing some economic sanctions. But what brings America into World War II? It's the sneak attack. It's Pearl Harbor. It is their calculated risk. We're going to win this war in one shot. It's the haymaker punch, the one-hitter quitter that's going to knock you out, and I'm going to win with one hit. And it didn't work. But you know what it did do? It mobilized the industry of the greatest industrial nation on earth and brought it with singular focus to end you. And NICE has done roughly the same thing. Okay, are we good then for our last 4 chapters? All right, thank you very much.